body and act as filters or traps for foreign particles such as bacteria. But once in the lymph nodes, the captive anthrax spores transform from dormant to active bacteria, thereby killing the immune cells in the lymph nodes. These deadly germs then break free and are released into the bloodstream.
It'll actually start dividing and growing within the blood system. And there it actually starts producing a series of toxins, which we collectively refer to as anthrax toxin, that do direct damage to the host. In addition, they also suppress the immune system, allowing the bacteria to grow to very high numbers within the human host.
In less than a week, these microbial fiends can multiply to such high numbers and secrete so much toxin that the blood vessels begin to leak uncontrollably. Loss of blood from leaky blood vessels results in multiple organ failure and death.
Antibiotic treatment is effective if given during the first wave of disease to stop the bacteria from growing and reverse the disease. But once a certain concentration of bacteria and toxin has been reached within the host, antibiotics are no longer effective.
Yet this microbe that takes no prisoners may also be able to neutralize one of mankind's most dreaded diseases. At UCLA, Dr. Kenneth Bradley has been researching whether the lethal anthrax toxin may be used to treat cancer in the future.
It turns out that many cancer cells require a signaling event within the cancer cells themselves in order to maintain their cancerous characteristics. Anthrax toxin actually short-circuits this process, thereby reversing the cancerous type of characteristics of these cells.
But turning a bioterrorism agent into a cancer-fighting weapon won't happen overnight. Bacillus anthracis remains alarming. But are the scariest germs the result of nature or some other sinister force?
The fact is, nature's done a very good job at creating some of the most diabolical and nasty viruses that we know about. In fact, one can argue that nature does a far better job at this than we will ever do.
The next germ could become an even deadlier agent than anthrax. Number 4, the variola virus, which causes smallpox.
Smallpox is the organism that keeps me awake at night when I think about the biological terrorism threat.
Smallpox is a frightening disease because the virus is easily transmitted through inhalation or physical contact with an infected person or object. In the 20th century alone, it wiped out 500 million people around the globe. The severe form, known as hemorrhagic smallpox, has a fatality rate of 90 to 100%. Unlike other viruses, humans are its only prey. Once inside the body, the variola virus replicates in white blood cells, the spleen, bone marrow, and lymph nodes, causing fever and toxemia before unleashing its full fury. After 2 weeks, the virus lodges in small blood vessels of the skin and mouth, hijacking cells to use their metabolic machinery to replicate. As it multiplies, the virus produces festering infectious blisters and hemorrhaging in the skin and mucous membranes. All this leads to a painful death.
Because the virus has a very long incubation time before the classical rash breaks out, you can bet that there'll be many people infected before somebody determines that smallpox has occurred based on the presence of the classical rash.
By the 20th century, smallpox had taken a terrible toll on the human population. In 1979, it was finally eradicated through a global vaccination program. The disease was gone, but the smallpox virus lives on. By an international agreement, the remaining vials of smallpox were to be kept in 2 guarded storage locations, one at the Center for Disease Control in Atlanta, Georgia, and the other in Vector, a biological laboratory in central Russia.
countries were asked to send any isolates or collections of smallpox to one of these two laboratories. There's absolutely no way to verify that that was done. It's possible that there's smallpox virus, not by intent, but simply by oversight, sitting in freezers in various places around the world.
Among other things, the smallpox virus is kept for its medical value in developing vaccines for other illnesses. But many worry that the remaining vials of the virus could get into the wrong hands and be used as a biological warfare agent. The vaccination program was so long ago that the memory cells of those who were inoculated are no longer effective at mounting a counterattack. And currently, there's no policy to vaccinate the general population against possible bioterrorism agents.
If anybody got a hold of the smallpox virus and decided to use it as a biological weapon, it would be a nightmare, because the virus spreads very quickly from person to person. And once that happens, it's unlikely we could stop the outbreak with vaccination.
Smallpox has the potential to kill again. That's why it's number 4. But there's another ancient germ that hasn't stopped killing since almost the beginning of human civilization.
Stars shining bright above you. Night breezes seem to whisper, I love you. Dream a little dream of me.
Daisy, Mark Jacobs.
You're hiking in the mountains. The setting appears peaceful and serene. But nearby, a killer patiently waits for its next victim. Number 3, Yersinia pestis, which causes the bubonic plague. A swarm of fleas are infesting a dead squirrel. While drawing blood from the animal for sustenance, the fleas also ingest treacherous bacteria. The germs don't kill the fleas, but will use them as transportation. Now, the fleas search for another source of blood, and it happens to be you. The bacteria come along for the ride. You feel bites on your arm. The flea's saliva, now filled with the bacteria, is injected into your skin through their tube-like mouth. You swat them off and continue to hike. But the lethal bacteria have stayed and found a new habitat to breed. They travel to your regional lymph nodes and begin multiplying. This causes swelling the size of oranges in your armpits, neck, and groin from inflammation and the white blood cells that rush to the scene. Eventually, the white blood cells die, pus builds up, and the lymph nodes burst open, releasing bacteria and lethal toxins into the bloodstream. Without antibiotic treatment, you will die within a week from shock due to spontaneous bleeding into the skin and mucous membranes. Yersinia pestis is an ancient bacterium that causes the bubonic plague. In the 14th century alone, the disease took over 75 million lives. Often dismissed as a pathogen of yesteryear, the bacterial disease continues to kill 1,000 to 2,000 worldwide yearly.
So if you're in the mountains and you see a dead squirrel, don't go near it, because that squirrel may have died from plague and the fleas could jump on you and cause plague. It could get into the bloodstream immediately and cause a systemic type of plague that has a mortality rate of 50 to 75% if it's left untreated.
Yersinia pestis is considered by many to be the deadliest germ in the history of human civilization. Although another horrifying germ just might catch up to it. Number 2, the human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV. HIV can cause the acquired immune deficiency syndrome known as AIDS. which has taken approximately 25 million lives since 1975. At this very moment, HIV infects more than 36 million people across the world.
HIV is a diabolical virus. The cells it infects are the very cells that should be fighting it off. And the problem is, unlike many other viruses, the human body cannot get rid of it. It's an infection for life.
Each virus has its own way of ravaging the human body, but HIV is completely unique. HIV itself doesn't kill. The microbial stalker shuts down a person's immune defenses, the tools used to fight off invading germs, by infecting and annihilating crucial immune cells called helper T cells. Once a person loses too many T cells, his or her body can no longer deal with other microbes that cause infections. HIV basically opens the floodgates. As a result, germs eventually overrun HIV-infected people, and they die of lung and skin infections or other diseases. This is known as AIDS.
Over time, as the virus multiplies more and the immune system gets ravaged by the virus, the human body has less and less potential to fight off HIV because the HIV is killing the very cells that should be fighting it off.
Someone who has HIV cannot get rid of the virus. They can only give copies of it to some other person when they interact with them. The virus enters humans and you don't know you have it for a very long period of time. And this allows you to more easily pass it on to other humans in the population.
There are currently several drugs to combat HIV. They cannot cure the infection, but they can keep it in check by suppressing HIV replication. Unfortunately, in Africa and other developing parts of the world where HIV is spreading most rapidly, most people don't have access or enough money to buy these drugs. So what is considered by many to be the scariest germ to exist on the face of the earth? It is believed that the origin of this killer lies in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in Africa. Bush hunters are returning from a successful hunt. They've captured and killed chimpanzees to feed their starving families. But instead, they may deliver them a death sentence. Their bloody knives and hands are covered with perhaps the most lethal germ on the planet. Number 1, the Ebola virus. This microbial predator causes Ebola hemorrhagic fever, a bleeding disorder, which has nearly a 100% fatality rate, the highest of any known pathogen. And what's more, there's no cure.
Ebola virus is highly deadly. It's one of the most deadly viruses ever known to interact with humans.
Ebola is called a hot virus because it's so lethal. Transmission of the disease is still unconfirmed. Gorillas and chimps were originally thought to be the reservoir host of the pathogen. The virus doesn't affect reservoir hosts. They're merely carriers of the virus. But startling new evidence suggests that the Central African fruit bat may be the reservoir, which in turn infects the ape species. Ebola is transmitted to humans through blood or bodily fluid of an infected animal or human who's contracted the disease. Hundreds have already fallen victim to this microbe in Central Africa.
There's a ritual among some tribes in Africa where the body of a dead relative is washed by all members of the family. Well, that's a perfect recipe for spreading Ebola from one person to another, because you have blood that is teeming with the virus.
Once Ebola enters the body, the virus targets many types of cells, eventually entering cells lining the blood vessels, where it multiplies so quickly it destroys the vessel surfaces, causing profuse internal bleeding. Ebola viruses saturate the bloodstream, causing the formation of blood clots, which eventually block the blood supply to the major organs, This leads to organ failure. Within 1 to 2 weeks, the clotting leads to death in a process called crashing out, with spontaneous hemorrhaging occurring from every possible orifice.
A person dies a violent death with bleeding out of all orifices and sometimes even blood oozing through the skin.
Contracting Ebola may be rare for the average citizen of the world, but since the virus spreads with destructive speed and there is no approved vaccine or treatment, the CDC has classified the Ebola virus as a Category A bioterrorism agent. This means it has the highest potential for adverse large-scale human catastrophes.
There's no evidence that Ebola can be transmitted via the respiratory route in humans, but they've shown that it can be transmitted via the respiratory route in apes. So that's a little scary. That's easier transmission than transmission by contact with blood.
These killer germs are undoubtedly here to stay. But at any time, one of these blood-curdling monsters could be bumped off the list. In the future, an even scarier germ could emerge that's highly contagious, resistant to all drugs and our immune system. Mankind could face microbial Armageddon from one of the smallest creatures in the world.